This is a Fox News Alert. I'm Brett Baer in Washington. Now Hillary Clinton says she really is sorry about the email scandal. After spending months refusing to apologize for her use of a private email server as Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton is tonight saying the magic words. But is the change in tone and delivery going to change the direction of her sliding poll numbers? Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry is covering the Clinton campaign tonight. Good evening, Ed.
Good evening, Brett. In part, Hillary Clinton is trying to clean up Friday's interview with NBC News, where she stopped short of an apology, said she was only sorry for this becoming so confusing for voters. So tonight we're hearing a change, not just in her words, but listen even to her voice.
That was a mistake. I'm sorry about that. I take responsibility. And I'm trying to be as transparent as I possibly can.
A dramatic shift for a candidate who had been joking about the email controversy and a campaign that had blown this off at first. Now they are shifting gears with a new strategy that has even some Democrats tonight raising their eyebrows.
Let's do it together.
So we will do it.
Just as Hillary Clinton hit the reset button on Russian relations, her team is now trying that with her struggling campaign. Her advisors ironically revealing in a carefully coordinated leak to the New York Times they want to bring more spontaneity to a cautious campaign and have a strategy to have Clinton show more humor and heart, as the candidate retweeted this MSNBC clip.
Workout of choice? Swimming, but that's not always available, so treadmill and weights and walking. And the food you crave most? Probably chocolate.
Except back in June, Clinton's aides claimed they were planning to show her softer side in the run-up to the second launch of her campaign on Roosevelt Island. So veteran Democratic strategist David Axelrod tweeted, "Today's New York Times story on HRC read more like The Onion, her detailed plan to show more authenticity and spontaneity. Hashtag just do it." Clinton advisors also told the Times after conducting a focus group in which voters said they wanted to hear more on emails, the campaign decided to get more transparent, and the candidate offered a more contrite tone. Despite admitting to that poll-tested strategy, Clinton went off message, insisting to the Associated Press the email trouble has not damaged her campaign at all. Yet a new Monmouth University poll shows Clinton's lead nationally continues to shrink. She's at 42%, down 10 percentage points in a month, while Vice President Joe Biden and Democratic Socialist Senator Bernie Sanders are in a virtual tie for second.
Text or email? I'm sure that's appropriate. We asked Jeb Bush, so we're asking you.
Email.
That MSNBC clip may also have been off message, especially since a second review by the intelligence community has found that 2 emails in Clinton's server, including one about North Korea's nuclear weapons program, did in fact contain highly classified information when she received them. As Secretary of State John Kerry today scrambled to deal with the mushrooming demands by Congress and the public for various Clinton records, appointing retired Ambassador Janice Jacobs to serve as transparency coordinator, as officials insisted they were not simply adding more bureaucracy.
The idea here is not to create another layer. In fact, far from it. It's to try to cut through the layers.
Now, just moments ago, a spokeswoman at the Republican National Committee reacting to that ABC News interview by saying, quote, "The only thing Hillary Clinton regrets is that she got caught and is dropping in the polls, not the fact that her secret email server left classified information exposed to the Russians and Chinese." That from the RNC. Clinton, meanwhile, tries to change the subject again tomorrow with a big speech here in Washington on the Iran nuclear deal. Brett?
Ed, thank you. Now to a story overseas that administration critics insist is a direct result of Obama-Clinton foreign policy decisions, or the lack of them. Hundreds of thousands of people are fleeing persecution, poverty, and civil war in the Middle East, and the debate over what to do about them is intensifying here in Washington tonight. Refugees fleeing Syria and Iraq are flooding Europe, and now the U.S. State Department is reassessing this country's policy. We have Fox team coverage tonight. Britt Hume with how much blame the U.S. deserves for the situation. But we begin with Kevin Corke at the White House with what the president is considering. Good evening, Kevin.
Brett, good evening to you. While European countries have seen a massive influx of refugees trying to escape all the carnage in Syria, relatively few have made their way here to the U.S. But soon, that could change.
The question is, what can the United States do to respond to that humanitarian crisis? And what we have already done is substantially more than any other country in the world.
The U.S. has contributed $4 billion in aid and soon could be doing even more. And considering allowing more Syrian refugees into the U.S., the Obama administration today signaled an evolving strategy in dealing with the burgeoning humanitarian crisis overtaking Europe.
We've taken in 1,500 since the beginning of the conflict, about 1,300 of those since January of this year alone.
Numbers that could rise dramatically, especially if the United Nations can convince the U.S. to do more. Annually, the U.S. takes in 70,000 refugees from areas all over the globe. But Syria is a special case. The State Department has received 17,000 referrals for Syrians from the UN High Commissioner for Refugees since 2011. The UN would like the states to take in thousands more than the 1,500 to 1,800 slated for the year. By contrast, Germany has said it can accommodate up to 500,000 refugees a year.
The whole world is looking at us, and we can't just say, listen, Syria is too far away, we won't deal with the problem.
The White House shift comes amid heart-wrenching pictures from across Europe and the Middle East, images of desperation and devastation. But just how many refugees could end up here is a sensitive issue. Texas, California, New York, Michigan, and Florida already boast the largest global refugee populations in the U.S. And whether new arrivals end up there or elsewhere, they'll need to be vetted to identify and weed out potential terrorists. A law enforcement nightmare with serious national security implications.
Look, we're very compassionate on this issue. I think it's a tragedy, extraordinary proportions, but we got to do this thing right, and just to wholesale let in, thousands of Syrians into the United States, not knowing who they are, I think would be very irresponsible.
And to underscore that point, one of the FBI's top terrorism experts, Michael Steinbach, spoke before Congress back in February, and during those comments, he said there was actually no clear way to positively vet refugees that come from so-called failed states, and that includes, Brett, places like Syria.
Kevin Corke live on the North Lawn. Kevin, thank you. Well, the president and his critics point fingers at each other over the root cause of the refugee crisis. Senior political analyst Brit Hume is here tonight to break it down for us. Good evening, Brit.
Hi, Brett. It is common on the left these days to argue that the refugee crisis now engulfing Europe is in large measure America's fault, not because of what it has failed to do, but because of what it did by its past interventions in the Middle East. But most of those fleeing the region now come from Syria, a place where the U.S. has done next to nothing despite the hideous human carnage wrought by the Syrian regime. Remember the Obama assertion 4 years ago that it was time for Bashar Assad to go? Nothing came of that, nor of the Obama threat to use force to end Assad's chemical weapons program. That job the president turned over to Vladimir Putin, who is now putting forces into Syria to protect Assad. President Obama and his admirers defend his inaction in Syria the same way they defend his withdrawal from Iraq and his faint and limited efforts against the Islamic State. They believe the use of American forces is likely to make things worse, not better, and that America has too often been the bad guy on the world stage. As Mr. Obama said last month, quote, "It's not the job of the President of the United States to solve every problem in the Middle East." This is another way of stating the old idea that America, for all its strengths, cannot go everywhere. That is certainly true. But as adapted by President Obama, it has come to mean America cannot go anywhere. Brett?
With all the focus on illegal immigration here in the U.S. politically, you heard at the back end of Kevin's piece the concern about vetting any refugees that come over from Syria or Iraq, for that matter.
Well, that's exactly right. And this country has had, and many countries have had, very good experiences with refugees who have had terrible journeys. Then those who have survived have turned out to be people of ability and wherewithal, else they wouldn't have made it to their destination. The problem, of course, with this wave of immigrants is that you don't know, because of where they're coming from, how many of them might, as was reported earlier, be terrorists. And this poses a dilemma for every single country involved in this process, or potentially involved in this process, and that, of course, includes the U.S.
All right, Britt, thank you.
Bet.
Senate Democrats picked up more support today for President Obama's nuclear deal with Iran, and it is apparently enough to block a vote on a resolution of disapproval. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel has details from Capitol Hill tonight.
Now back from a 5-week recess, the first order of business in the Senate is the Obama administration's nuclear deal with Iran.
For many, this has been a very difficult decision. For some, it was made even more difficult by assertions from the administration that the only choice was between this agreement and war.
West Virginia's Joe Manchin is one of 4 Senate Democrats who says he'll join with Republicans to oppose this Iran nuclear deal. Manchin said, quote, lifting sanctions without ensuring that Iran's sponsorship of terrorism is neutralized is dangerous to regional and American security. 3 Senate Democrats, Oregon's Ron Wyden, Connecticut's Richard Blumenthal, and Michigan's Gary Peters expressed support for the deal, although all said they have reservations. Minority Leader Harry Reid tried to reassure his fellow Democrats and the American people.
We've done everything possible to make sure that if Iran cheats, we'll know quickly and we'll act immediately and with the international community behind us. That makes us safer. That makes Israel safer. That makes the world safer.
Now there are at least 41 Democrats in favor of the deal, which means they could block Republicans from a disapproval vote.
The administration is gratified by the growing support that we've seen in the United States Congress for the international agreement to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Foreign Relations Chairman Republican Bob Corker says on an issue of this magnitude, there needs to be an up or down vote.
I do think the American people deserve to know where senators and House members stand on this serious piece of policy, foreign policy that is before us.
At this point, it doesn't look likely that Reid is going to back off the 60-vote threshold. So unless some hearts and minds and votes are changed in the course of the debate, the president is not likely to need his veto power. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thanks. Up next, Dr. Ben Carson riding the wave as the ultimate outsider running for president, or at least one of them. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 32 in Chicago, where investigators say a promising lead has come up empty in the search for 3 suspects involved in the slaying of a suburban police officer. The leader of the task force says 3 men seen in a video from a home near the crime scene were not involved. Thousands attended yesterday's funeral for Fox Lake Police Lieutenant Charles Joseph Glenowitz. Fox 9 in the Twin Cities as the dentist in the center of an international uproar over the killing of a beloved lion in Zimbabwe returns to work. Walter Palmer entered the clinic in Bloomington without speaking to media and a small group of protesters there. Officials in Zimbabwe say they want to extradite Palmer for the death of a lion named Cecil. Palmer maintains he believed he was acting legally. And this is a live look at Dallas from our affiliate Fox 4. The big story there tonight, a Texas couple is reunited with their baby who was switched at birth. The child was born in El Salvador and was returned to the parents yesterday. A doctor is being investigated on suspicion of operating a baby trafficking gang. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.